We'll be bringing on our next presenter. This is Liz Beckett from the University of Adelaide. And if you're groaning at the title of her talk, you have me to blame for that. I may have convinced Liz to put in a slight pun. So, yeah, not even going to apologize for that one. So hopefully Liz should be coming on soon. I just saw her drop away from the attendees list and appear on the panelist list. So Liz, you just need to share your screen and turn on your audio. Perfect.
All right. Sorry.
No worries. Cheers, Liz. Take it away.
All right, Liam, thank you. Well, you will be blamed for the pun within my title a number of times. No, it's great. So I had said to Liam I would like to talk about our experience with Phlipping Physiology Practicals, and I know we've had a couple of presentations that have had a very similar theme. I guess what might be a little bit more unique about my situation is that we were heavily using lab station when COVID struck. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit specifically about our experiences with that. So Liam suggested, because of the alliteration of Phlipping Physiology Practicals, so you will see that theme repeat now throughout my presentation. So here we've got fundamentals. And the fundamentals of why we have on-campus practicals are that they, and for all of you out there that are listening to this presentation, this is old news with you guys, but I think a lot of us as physiologists appreciate that students get inspired, interested, engaged in the physiology material when they see it come into life in a lab practical situation. Lab practicals, hands-on lab practicals, help to reinforce the concepts that are covered in lectures and in any online material that they get preceding those, and help to achieve the learning outcomes. In our physiology course, 6 of 7 learning outcomes actually relate to our practical activities. The students get an opportunity to encounter biological variability, something that they don't get so much if they were to do any sort of simulation. They get to see the sights, the sounds, and being part of a lab practical contributes to learning satisfaction. And that's been shown by a number of different researchers. We also feel it is really important to preserve this component of our curriculum because it's an opportunity to develop and hone students' research skills. In our practicals, they have an opportunity to learn more about good experimental design, how to work safely and ethically in the research laboratory, how to collect, record, and interpret and present data, and to work effectively as part of a team in a lab environment. Now, one thing that we probably don't appreciate as much as we should, but in a on-campus laboratory environment, this is also a unique and I guess less prevalent opportunity for a student-student and student-to-educator interaction. We find that in our on-campus laboratories, this is an opportunity for the instructor to really engage and get to know the students, for students to get to know each other. There's even opportunities for some pastoral care and professional development opportunities. So as I said earlier, well, I'm the coordinator of 2 large physiology courses that run in semester 1 and in semester 2 of our academic year. We have been using Lab Station now for a number of years within our practicals. So for those of you that are not so familiar with Lab Station, this is a desktop application that allows us to be able to run effectively LT practicals, but in situ in the laboratory. So it doesn't come with all the bells and whistles of the cloud-based LT, in that students just use the lab station in the laboratory, and when they leave it, then they don't have a subscription to the LT. But for our intents and purposes for running our practicals, it suffices, it's good. And as an educator, it's fantastic because I get to make my practicals using the LT cloud-based platform. So in semester 1 this year, we had 315 students enrolled. Our plan was to have 1 demonstrator per 20 students and 2 classes each afternoon. 4 students typically work in a group. Each of our 4-hour practicals are repeated 7 times over a fortnight, starting in week 4 of the 12-week semester. Now, the fact that our practicals start in week 4 was an absolute godsend in 2020, because really it was in week 3 that we found out that we would have to be doing this all remotely. Oops, sorry. So just from the bottom half of this slide, we can see that these are the practicals that repeat over the semester. And you can see from these brief descriptions of what the practicals involved, it is pretty hands-on. We use 2-point calipers and Fraun-Frey probes to investigate properties and distributions of sensory receptors. We use finger pulse and grip strength transducers to examine muscle recruitment, summation, and fatigue. And in the cardiovascular and respiratory practicals, we also use spirometry, heart rate, and blood pressure monitors. So, and this is just a slide showing you our beautiful LT on lab station, I guess. And this is what a student would typically be presented with during their lab station practical and the procedure that they have to follow in their groups. So here we've got freaking out for Liam. See, PH, keep it going. With our pandemic panic, we were aware, even by week 1, that we had a component of our cohort, 15 of our 315 students, that were currently offshore, and it was going to be impossible for them to get to Adelaide in time for the semester to start, and everybody was a bit unsure of when they would get here, and we were advised that we would have to make modifications to allow them to be able to perform the components of the course remotely. So we contacted ADI and we were saying we're going to need 15 LT licenses for that particular purpose. So we were already starting to think about how are we going to manage these 15 students that had some issues with actually being there in person. But by week 3, then the decision had been made for the university that all students were to study remotely. And this left us in a bit of a quandary because whilst we had been thinking about things like using Zoom for our 15 students, we hadn't really thought about doing it for all 315. And those face-to-face practicals were due to start in week 4. So thank you so much to ADI because we really was a godsend. We had unlimited LT licenses provided free of charge to help us respond to the challenges of COVID. Now, our challenges were that all of these practicals needed to be rapidly modified and contextualized for a remote online format. I've included this because I know it's sort of painful to talk about money and budget, but we had already had all of our casual demonstrator contracts approved and set up, and we were told under no circumstances were we going to get any extension on that. So we had to work with the money that we had already been approved for the course. And that meant that we couldn't pay for extra hours to have people doing synchronous Zoom sessions or extra marking. Now, one challenge that we had that I feel like so many of you out there have really risen to and been able to cope with so much better than I guess I was able to is that the rapid upskilling of being able to use Zoom and LT synchronously with our demonstrators in groups for large cohorts. Many of our demonstrators were new to the whole demonstrating gig. We had actually just spent a couple of weeks training them into what was going to happen in the face-to-face practicals. So they really were freaked out at the thought of trying to host these students in Zoom synchronously with using the LT. Also, we found that our students were in various states of flux. It was a really unsettling period. Some students were obviously trying to get here from overseas. Other students were trying to return home. We found it really, really difficult, therefore, to impose that between 2 and 6 p.m. on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday that you had to attend for these practicals. So the other challenge was that we had to introduce students to LT. None of the students had been aware of its existence. We had been using LabStation. They had to accept the invitations and download the supporting software really quickly. So in response to this, we used our LT to modify and contextualize the format of our practicals for the students that were needing to now complete it from home. This is finding solutions, Liam. Finding, yep, get it. Demonstration videos were made. We did this. It was very high tech. We used our mobile phones. We had a lot of conversations about whether it was better to make our videos on a Samsung versus an iPhone. And we inserted these into the LT lessons. And thank you for introducing me to, oh no, I'm going to forget the name. It's got a funny name like pineapple, or I'm not sure, but the Liam's nodding, but I've got the name wrong. Handbrake for to be able to convert our videos into a format that was appropriate for LT. Students had to complete a pre-lab quiz. This was already set up using our LMS and then given 1 week to complete the LT practical. Now, this is where I feel that if I had to do it all again, I would have done it a bit differently. Our students, we did this in an asynchronous mode, and students submitted their work individually. We did set up some discussion forums online via the LMS to enable the coordinator and demonstrators to respond to any student queries as they went along. But as I mentioned, students did submit their completed lessons as individuals, which I feel meant that we lost this group work component of our beloved practicals. And most of our demonstrators' hours were actually used then for answering student questions and for marking their submitted practicals. So this is just an example just to show us the sorts of improvisations and modifications that we made very rapidly on the night before some of our practicals were due to go live. Our laboratory support staff and our demonstrators and I sort of worked together to make videos to show the types of data that would have been recorded if they had have been able to attend. And we uploaded quickly into LT things like, this is what your lab book looked like. Can you please complete the notes by listening to the audio and watching the video, and fill in the tables of data. So we felt like it was still giving them an opportunity to be interactive and not just be told, here's a table of data. They actually had to interact with the videos and record it as if they were in the laboratory. We also had to preface our practicals with some sort of context about how we understand and appreciate that this is not normal for them, but that that this is a read-only version of the acquisition frame, because we didn't want them to be freaked out about pressing start whenever they didn't have any equipment. And the idea of this is data that was pre-recorded and sample data that you can now analyze and draw conclusions from. And that worked, I think, reasonably well. And that was awesome to have that capability. Here's just with our spirometry, that was the one that we were, I guess, most worried about, because how do we take this very hands-on, very active practical and put it into an online format? But our demonstrators really rose to the occasion and produced some beautiful mobile phone acquired videos of them doing the spirometry, and the students were able to then analyze the data. So this is the type of feedback that we got from our students. And I just need to move. Sorry. Okay. So as you can see, this is our feedback with our PH. The remote learning hasn't changed my study that much. I used to watch lectures online anyways. I just became a bit upset about not being able to do the prac ourselves. But apart from that, it was still so interactive. The practicals, they find them easy to understand and well put together. They found them to be more time consuming because I guess they had lost that group work aspect and they had to really work their way through all the material by themselves. We did encourage them to get online onto Zoom and form their own groups to discuss, but I think that was relatively rare. We did get a comment that the remote online practicals were the best thing that one person had ever done, which I thought was a pretty good commendation. They did find that the practicals were more difficult as opposed to doing it in person. And I think it was because they lost that peer-to-peer group support. So we did some number crunching. This is looking at the figures. We did some number crunching and we compared 2017 with 2020. The reason why we left 18 and 19 off was because we had made other modifications in those years that we felt might skew the data. So we have looked at our 2017 on-campus group format. And you can see here that the overall course grade wasn't very different between 2017 and 2020. Practical scores, the average score for our practical component was higher statistically than 2020, and we believe strongly that this was because of the loss of the group aspect and the group submission. And if we look at the correlation between our theory exam scores, this is sort of the knowledge and the application of the concepts in a MCQ type test compared to the practical scores in 2017, you can see that the correlation is rather flat, and that is because students tended to perform extremely well in their group submissions. Whereas in contrast, in 2020, there was much tighter correlation between their theory exam score and their practical scores. Typically, really high performing students in exams also performed really well in their practicals. And actually, when we looked at these in a little bit more detail, we also found that these were students that were doing makeup practicals and had done individual submissions. So generally, some group members will pull up the marks. So just then, in conclusion then, these are our final thoughts. There are various pros and cons with the remote online format. We find that there was reduced peer and educator interaction and support. The group work aspect in our situation was greatly diminished, and we would do it differently. If we had to repeat it, we would set up those synchronous Zoom sessions and do it more in a group setting. Although we did feel that this year, for first time in many years, the practical assessment scores actually correlated much more accurately with the theory exam scores. So perhaps, it could be said that it's actually a fairer result. And there were certainly less OH&S and ethics concerns with everybody being at home. All right, that's me, and I'm happy to take questions if we have time.
Awesome. Cheers, Liz. And thank you, Helen, for a good pun in the chat. So we did have Tracy, who presented yesterday, say that it was great to see the similarities in the student feedback that she presented yesterday. And we do actually have one question that just popped in from Terry. So I'll read that out now. I know we have spoken of this in other venues. Can you comment on the use of pre-recorded data?
Yes, the pre-recorded data. So we took some of the data from the last time that we had run the course face-to-face. And so we used, for some of our sensory experiments, we actually did the experiment live and recorded that. And then we also gave them composite data that was from the previous year's class. And then for the spirometry, we used the sample data that ADI had in their repository, which was awesome. I think it was certainly a great savior for this particular year. I think it wouldn't replace, if you had the opportunity to have the students in for them to record their own data, it wouldn't replace that. But in situations where it's too logistically difficult to acquire the data, then I think that's the way to go. And it's certainly better than a simulation where it's a very defined result each time. At least with the pre-recorded data, it was once recorded live. So
yeah. Great. Cheers. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks again, Liz.